Now, let's be clear. If you were dealing with somebody in the past and they were a horrible person that did very bad things to you, and they're still around, you still may not want to be hanging around with them, because they still may be a very terrible person who's going to do bad things to you. It's not like you have to wipe out that from your memory. But if they're not doing bad things to you, you don't have to live with that. You don't have to hold that in your mind and be dealing with it every day. Because that is living in the past. And now, that whole idea of not going back to the past did create a problem for me. Because one of the things, I've talked about here several times is a concept that I think is very meaningful. And it comes from the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus said, his disciples are worried about the end. Everybody's worried about the end, right? The end of times is coming. What are we going to do? And he said, why are you concerned about the end? Do you know the beginning? Because in the beginning is the end. And he who stands at the beginning will not die. And I go back, wow, that's very profound, but it's telling us to go back to the beginning. But we all know you can't go back. And I did meditate on this and try to get it to make sense and realize that you don't go back to the beginning, you go forward to the beginning. Because the universe is a wheel. Now think about a wheel. It's sitting here on the ground. You're that part of the wheel that's on the ground. And when the wheel moves forward, you move up off of the ground, but by going forward, you move back to it. And think about a wheel. Have you ever driven on black ice or hydroplaning? And there you are going down the road, and then you are totally out of control. You might go anywhere, on the road or off the road, because you have no control. You're still moving, but you're not back on the ground. And that's what happens in our lives. See, to live in this material world, we move away from the spiritual. The ground is our spiritual base. And we move forward and we move away from that. But again, think about that wheel. The only part that pushes the wheel forward is the part that's on the ground. The rest of it has no actual use, it's just there. The only part that can control which direction the wheel goes is the part that's on the ground. And in our lives, the only way we have the energy, the only way we have the control is when we're connected to Spirit. But we're going to go through this physical existence. And we have a choice all of the time about how much of our time we spend on the ground. Because see, the universe too is a wheel. And it's wheels within wheels. Do you know that the PLC is a business? It is. It's a spiritual center. And that's our base, that's our foundation, that's our ground. But, Angie and I have talked about this many times, if more money goes out than comes in, then our spiritual ideas may be there, but the Positive Living Center won't be there. Because it has to live in this material world. And yet, it's frustrating because the time we have to spend on that is not necessarily the time we get to spend back at that spiritual foundation. And the universe itself is a wheel because it started in pure spirit. And then it moved to where there was matter. We refer to it as inert matter. One might say as far from spirituality as you can get. And then, and I've talked about this before, it developed life. with a form of consciousness, and then it developed a higher consciousness. And that higher consciousness wants to get back to the spiritual. And that's the circle of the universe. To move from pure spirit into the material and back to pure spirit. But not by going backwards, but by going forwards. And every day we make that choice. You know, at night when we're asleep, we've gone back to the source, if you will. And every morning when we wake up, we choose. We can ride a big wheel. We can ride a wheel that takes us away from our foundation, takes us away from spirituality all day long. And we never get back to it until late at night. Or we can choose to ride a little wheel. And that little wheel is going to go back to the surface regularly. And all through the day, it's going to start in spirit and go back to spirit. And return to the beginning, and return to the beginning, and return to the beginning. Because, you know, people who have power, people who have physical power in this universe, or in our culture, like to call themselves big wheels. They're the big wheels. But we know where the real power is. And the real power, the spiritual power, is in the little wheels. That very, very often, very regularly, go back to the ground, go back to the beginning, and go back to source, which is all that we have. And so